So to get us started this evening, I'd like to introduce you guys all to Brian Malone. Brian Malone is the director of the Student Financial Aid Office at the University of New Mexico. He started as a full-time staff member at UNM in 1998 and became director in 2009. He earned his bachelor's and master's degree at UNM. So really excited. I hope you guys are ready. Mr. Brian Malone, it's all on you.
All right, very good. Thank you, Brian. Much appreciated. As Brian indicated, I am the director of the Student Financial Aid Office here at UNM, and I'm going to cover kind of general information on how to access financial aid. So the point of the presentation is really, so hopefully that's applicable to any school you may be attending. And along those lines, I may have examples here and there from UNM, but really, once again, just kind of tips along the lines of how to work with individual schools. Schools do vary very much, as well you'll see as we go through. A lot of the federal pieces of financial aid can be similar, but scholarships, how offices work, vary greatly. So we'll talk about that in individual situations. As Brian indicated, if you have any questions, enter them in the chat. As we go along, I'll be sharing my screen here in a moment, and we'll go through kind of a traditional kind of PowerPoint situation. But please feel free, like I said, to ask questions. At the end is also my email address. So if there's something you don't want to ask here, you're welcome to email me outside of the presentation. So with that, I will begin here with sharing on my screen, and we'll get going. Okay, all right. So with accessing financial aid, let's get started. So we're going to cover here, as I mentioned, a few different things. We're going to cover about how to apply for federal financial aid, general basics for that, types of awards that are available, general tips on scholarship searches, kind of wide world out there, and general financial aid resources, which is also really kind of a reminder on how to work with your school. Schools have a variety of means in which for you to contact them. So just kind of talking about that on how it works with each school and the importance of talking to the school you're going to attend. So federal financial aid. Federal financial aid is really the backbone of the whole financial aid process. So the process really begins with the free application for federal student aid, also known as the FAFSA. The FAFSA, as you can see there, the URL is FAFSA.gov. You'll notice that I underline the word free. You'll hear that through other parts of the presentation. Basically, almost everything with financial aid should be free in getting information, application, things along those lines. We'll talk about an exception or two of that. But there were some websites out there in the past few years that have been closed down by the federal government that tried to charge for the free service of applying for federal financial aid. But please do not pay for anyone to help you fill out FAFSA information. Any school will help you with that, whether you're attending that school or not. Usually they have FAFSA workshops. Your high school may have one, but basically there's a ton of resources out there to help you fill out the FAFSA. The FAFSA for the upcoming school year, the school year that'll start next fall, comes out October 1st. So a little under, about 2 weeks from now. October 1st, 2020, the 2021-2022 FAFSA will be available. The FAFSA application utilizes something called prior year taxes, which is not a phrase you'll hear every day. Basically what that means is that you will use your 2019 tax information for the 2021-2022 cycle. This was a change that was made a few years ago, and it's actually a very good change. The reason it's good is it allows for a much higher utilization, as you can see it there, of what's called the IRS data retrieval tool. This means when you're filling out the FAFSA, your taxes, or your parents' taxes, should have been filed most likely over a year prior, or months earlier at least. That means it's available for the IRS to import it into the FAFSA itself. There is many reasons for doing this. One, just easier, you don't have to enter the tax information. It also helps if you're chosen for verification, information's accurate, you don't have to figure out what line you're pulling in, things along those lines. But that's once again, 2019 taxes are for the upcoming cycle, and please make sure to utilize the IRS data retrieval tool. When you fill out the FAFSA, you need to sign it electronically. You do this with something called the FSA, Federal Student Aid, online ID. You see the website right there, fsaid.ed.gov. This is, as I indicated, an electronic signature. You would use this for the FAFSA application. Your parents will use it for the FAFSA application. It's a good idea to get this set up prior to filling out the FAFSA, so that way you can sign it. It's also used later on in the financial aid cycle to sign promissory notes and to complete loan entrance counseling, and also to go through and see what your loan indebtedness is. Someone on here in the questions asked about what does it mean about taxes, like our taxes from work. Yes, that is accurate. The taxes that are used are your federal taxes off of your 1040 that you would fill out with the federal government. Okay. Continuing on about the FAFSA. So the FAFSA, I tell you, is available October 1st. Because of the IRS data retrieval tool and because of the fact that you should already have your tax information available, you can really fill it out day one on October 1, and I would encourage you to do so. Most schools, though, do have what's called a priority filing date. So that, if you'll notice, I'm saying it's a priority date, not a deadline. What this means is that usually schools will have it, there's limited funds that there are less funds than there is eligible students. So sometimes the priority filing date is used to distribute these limited funds to students. So basically the way I always like to put it is to maximize your opportunities by meeting the priority date. The priority date, as you see right there, varies greatly by school. So at UNM, for instance, our priority date is January 5th. Some schools are earlier. I've heard schools that have it December or November. There's other schools that can have it in February or March. It's all over the place, and this is one of the first times I will be indicating really important to talk to your school to find out what they have for their priority date, if they have one, and if so, what that date is. It is important, like I said, to maximize your eligibility, but if you do miss the priority date, you still should apply because there's still grant and loans that are available even if you miss the priority filing date. But once again, I really would encourage you to talk to your school and find out if they have a priority date and what it is. This could make a difference of thousands of dollars if you do not meet the priority date. There's a question in there about the FAFSA on when you would apply. If you're talking about if you apply in your sophomore, junior, senior year, you do apply for your FAFSA every year you're in college. But basically, I wouldn't apply until you're going to be ready to go into school. So if you're talking about sophomore, junior, high school, probably too early, but it's a matter of the year you're going to go into school, that's the time to apply. Once you fill out the FAFSA, that gets submitted. It goes to the U.S. Department of Education. You can report up to 10 schools on the FAFSA. So maybe at this point, you're still deciding where you want to go. You can send it off to 10 schools at once. Those 10 schools will then be sent your information, or one school, how many schools you apply to. All those schools will get your information. About 30% of students are selected for a process called verification. Verification is handled at the school itself, not with the federal government. So the federal government's the one who does the selecting for verification. Then they communicate that to the schools and to the student. And then your verification is then handled through the school. You'll see on here, verification may include many things: verifying your household size, income, marital status, registered for selective service. On here, as you would see, where I indicated about income, there's another indication. I said if you use that IRS data retrieval tool, you don't have to confirm your income because your income's already on the FAFSA and verified by the IRS. Missing requirements, and that's each school might use different phrasing on the additional information. They say verification documentation, missing requirements, follow-up information. This you will be communicated to by your school. Once again, could vary though. Most schools have a portal, like a website where you enter and get information relative to you. They may email you, they may mail it to you. So basically, once again, figure out what your school is doing. Through UNM, we post it through our school portal, and then the student gets an email. It is important, though, and we'll talk about this as we move forward, to follow up on additional documentation. So it's great that if you meet the priority date, get your FAFSA in, but if you don't follow up on verification, if you're selected, you may miss out on opportunities once again for funding. So what I would say is apply as soon as possible, definitely before the priority date. And if the school requests additional information, follow up as soon as possible to get everything lined up. You want that for a few reasons. One, you don't want to miss out on funding opportunities, but also you want to make sure that you have a clear idea of what you're eligible for well in advance so you can plan on what you need to do in order to meet your expenses as you start. Okay. So that FAFSA application is, like I said, a very primary, basically any school you're going to go to pretty much is, and for federal aid, of course, is going to look for the FAFSA information. There are additional sites, and there's one main one, and this is really for private schools. I don't have a lot of personal experience with it, but I do have some information here on it. It is called the College Scholarship Service Profile. CSS is really how you'll always hear it referred to. This is done by the College Board, which is an organization to help students attend college. As I indicated here, it's really used for private schools, and private schools use it to allocate their institutional aid. This is also available October 1st. You see the URL that's there. There's a fee to complete. So remember earlier I said everything should be free, and I said there's a couple exceptions. This is one of them. So there is a fee. It was $25 for initial applications, $16 for additional schools. This is much more in depth than the FAFSA. So the FAFSA information, a lot of it's really tax information about your family. How many people live in the household? How many are going to college? What's your tax information? That's a primary what the FAFSA revolves around. The CSS profile looks more in depth to the assets of the family and looks at things that are definitely not on the FAFSA application. The profile also has usually dates that are required by schools. And once again, emphasize here, work with your school, A, to find out if they require the profile for institutional aid, and 2, if they have any dates for it. Because once again, this could make thousands of dollars of difference. And even though we said don't use it at UNM, it is used at a lot of schools. Most private schools do utilize it. Okay. So moving on from the FAFSA and the profile, I want to talk a little bit about a couple of concepts that you're going to see that will be common but vary at schools. So what we're going to talk about here are two things: the cost of attendance and expected family contribution. So even though the expected family contribution is the second bullet, let's talk about that for a moment. The expected family contribution is a number that is derived from the FAFSA. So when you provide all that information on the FAFSA, it takes all the income information, household size, and it boils down largely to what's called the expected family contribution, or EFC. The expected family contribution is used in a few different ways. One way is it is used by the federal government to determine if you're eligible for grants. In other words, money you don't have to pay back. There's literally a chart that says if you have a 0 expected family contribution, you qualify for the maximum federal grant. That number, as it goes up, grant eligibility goes down. It is also used to determine, or partially determine, what a student's financial need is. What is financial need? Well, financial need is a formula that is your cost of attendance minus your expected family contribution. So what's a cost of attendance? Cost of attendance here is demonstrated with this little chart down here. And this represents expected expenses in attending school. So this is not a bill. So in this example here, you see I have an academic year and a semester and a few different categories. Well, if you notice, there's the academic year shows it's almost $22,000. It doesn't mean that it costs $22,000 to go to school in the form of a bill. It doesn't mean you'll be paying that school $22,000. If you'll notice on here, there's tuition and fees. You'll be paying that to the school. Room and board, you might be paying that to the school if you're living on campus. Books and supplies, you might be buying it from that school's bookstore, or you might be buying it on Amazon. Transportation, that's your car repairs, insurance, everything like that, you're not paying that to a school. You may be like paying a parking pass or something like that, but the majority of transportation would be outside the school. Miscellaneous, definitely outside the school. Kind of a grab bag here of medical expenses and personal care and laundry and stuff like that. Just all the other things that you may expect to incur. So I always look at cost of attendance is the cost of attending school while living. So in other words, it's not just when you're going to school, your only cost is not just tuition. It's also to put a roof over your head and have food and get the books and, like it says, get around town and things like that. So when you see cost of attendance, you should generally see it on when your school, every school will have cost of attendance listed on their websites. If you get an offer letter from a school, they'll list also the cost of attendance. Just realize when you're looking at that cost of attendance, once again, it's not a bill, but it's expected expenses that you'll have across the board in your life while you're attending school. So a quick example here, when I was saying about financial need, and this need is a concept that's used heavily in financial aid to help determine what other aid you can get, what type of aid and how much. So financial need calculation is the cost of attendance, which we just talked about. Remember I said that the example I had before is about $22,000. And an expected family contribution. Remember the expected family contribution comes off the FAFSA. So this is just an example here. I just made up a number, 3,000. In that case, a student would have a financial need of about $18,996. That in and of itself isn't that meaningful. It has to do with, like I said, what sort of aid you can get. We are going to be going over shortly the type of aid, and you'll see some of it is based on financial need, others is not. Usually scholarships are not based on financial need, but they apply against it. So like I said, we'll go through some examples here shortly. Okay. So award types, and we're going to go in the order really kind of a free money towards loans. So the first item you will see is the Pell Grant. The Pell Grant, as I mentioned earlier, is based off the expected family contribution. So when you fill out the FAFSA and they say your expected family contribution is X, that number is then used to determine if you can get the Pell Grant. As I mentioned earlier, the expected family contribution of 0 is the best you can get in order for grant eligibility. Generally up to about 5,500 means you're still eligible for grants. As I mentioned earlier, as that number rises, the grant decreases. So at 0, for instance, a full-time student could maybe get about $6,300 in grants. And if they have a 5,500 expected family contribution, maybe it's like $600 or something. So it, like I said, decreases as that number increases. It is, as you will see here, called free money. What do I mean by free money? I basically mean any grant or scholarship means that you are given it based on your eligibility. You do not have to pay it back. There are state and institutional grants. These are based on FAFSA results, a lot of times like the expected family contribution, like we were talking about. And in many cases, meeting a priority date. So once again, varies school by school. Make sure you talk to your school about that. These are free money. When I say state grants, usually that's only at public institutions and usually only the state you are a resident of. So in other words, if you reside in New Mexico and you go to the University of Missouri, you will most likely not qualify for the state grants there, but you may qualify for institutional grants there. Once again, check with your school, see what their rules are and what the priority date is. Work study. You may have heard this phrase out and about. Work study is another federal program, is also in New Mexico, a state version of it. This is based on FAFSA results. This is based on financial need, as are the state and institutional grants. So that number we talked about having the difference between your cost of attendance and your expected family contribution, that can help determine your eligibility for work study. So this is, in other words, a lower expected family contribution on the FAFSA would mean that you have higher need, which means it could be one of those awards you could get would be work study. Usually, once again, varies from school to school, could be based on meeting a priority date in addition to being eligible. There is a question on the FAFSA that says, are you interested in work study? I encourage students to always answer yes to that question unless you know for absolute sure you are not going to work. This doesn't negatively impact your grants. If you can see the way I have it listed here, it's because we award it after grants in the first place. and schools generally would do that as well. We at UNM, and I know a lot of schools, use that question though to determine if we're going to give you if work study if you're interested. Work study is really a great program. It is not free money in the fact that you don't have to pay it back, like the free money of grants, but you do have to work for it, as the name implies. The good thing about it though is that you're working usually on campus you're going, your work that you're going to school at, and your employer knows you're a student and that your primary task at that point in your life is to be attending school. So flexibility of schedule, stuff like that. Students who utilize work study tend to stay on target more for graduation, stay in school, and graduate usually closer to that 4-year mark. Okay, let's talk about loans. So loans thing, of course, you only want to kind of general comments about loans. Of course, you only want to borrow loans that you need. So obviously these, as the name implies, you have to pay the loan back. So that being said too, I also encourage you to utilize loans when needed because they are a good investment in your education. So once again, if you're minimizing what you're borrowing, it can be a solid, like I said, once again, a solid investment in your education and your future. 3 primary loans we're going to talk about. You can see 2 of them on this slide. We'll get to another one after this. The first loan is what's called a subsidized loan. This is, of course, based on FAFSA results, so you have to apply for the FAFSA. On here where it's offered automatically when eligible, at UNM that's the case. Schools generally that I'm aware of, that is also the case. There might be some schools out there that don't award loans off the bat, but every school I'm aware of offers the subsidized loan and generally will offer to you automatically. Why is it called subsidized? Because the federal government is subsidizing the interest, which means to you that you're not being charged interest while in school. What does that mean? That means that if you borrowed $5,000 and whenever that was subsidized during your career, when you graduate, you will owe $5,000. The interest does begin accruing and repayment begins 6 months after you leave school, but while you're in school, there's no interest. So it acts like a 0% interest while you're in school. The interest rates change every year. So once you get out of school, like I said, you may be at this point, the interest rates have been more in like the 4% range, but they vary all the way up to 8%. Once again, get changed every year. It hasn't been 8% in many years. And once again, it changes. But while you're in school, once again, on the subsidized loan, acts like a 0% interest loan. The unsubsidized loan also is, a FAFSA must be on file. Generally, once again, offered automatically when eligible. But why is it called unsubsidized? Because the interest accrues as soon as it's received and it is not subsidized by the federal government. So in this case, if you borrowed $2,000, when you graduate, you will owe more than $2,000 because the interest will accumulate. You do have the option of paying the interest as it accumulates. Every quarter, the U.S. Department of Education will contact you and say, oh, there's this much interest. Do you want to pay it? Or do you want to let it accumulate or capitalize on the principal? So if you can pay it, great. So like say you owed $50 in interest. If you pay the $50, then you still only owe the principal of what you borrowed. But if you let it capitalize on the principal, in the scenario I said where you borrowed $2,000, if it's $50 in interest, you now owe $2,050, and the next time interest accrues, it'll accrue on the $2,050. So once again, if you can pay it, pay the interest as it accrues. The last loan type we'll talk about for here from the federal government is what is called the PLUS loan or parent loan for undergraduate students. So this is also based on the FAFSA, but the parent is the borrower. So in this one, a parent can borrow the loan on behalf of a student, and it is credit-based. So there's all the subsidized and unsubsidized loan. If you've noticed earlier, I said nothing about a credit check. Subsidized and unsubsidized loan are based on filling out the FAFSA and your eligibility off the FAFSA for loans. It's also based on what year in school you're on. You can borrow more as you go further in school. We won't go into the great details on that. But that's the considerations that are for subsidized and unsubsidized loans. On the parent loan, once again, credit-based, which means that the parent's credit is checked by the U.S. Department of Education. If the parent is approved on credit, they may borrow. So it probably seems like a weird thing, like, well, of course they can borrow if they're approved. Well, the reason I say that is the parent, then if they get approved, can choose to borrow that loan, or they can choose not to. If they choose not to, then that's really kind of the end of the conversation. They don't borrow the loan. If they're denied, in other words, they didn't meet the credit requirement, the parent, of course, cannot borrow the loan, and the student has the ability to borrow additional unsubsidized loans. Just like the unsubsidized loan, interest accrues on these as soon as it is received. The parent loans tend to have a higher interest rate. And once again, the parent is the borrower. So even though they're doing it on behalf of the student, the parent is the one who actually is borrowing the loan, and they're the ones who actually have to pay it back. Okay. Let's talk scholarships a little bit. This one, first one here, most of you are familiar with in New Mexico. I want to talk about it because it's so common. And that is the Legislative Lottery Success Scholarship, probably known to you as the Lottery Scholarship. So the Legislative Lottery Scholarship is a great program in the state of New Mexico. It is available at public New Mexico schools, 2-year schools, community colleges, 4-year schools. It begins the second semester of college, as I indicated here, at a public New Mexico school. If you go to a 4-year school like UNM, you can receive up to 7 semesters. But as you see on there, I said it's the second semester. So it would be the 2nd through the 8th semester of school. And when I'm saying semesters, I mean fall and spring. So summer, the program is not available in summer school if you decide to go in summer school. If you go to a 2-year school, you can get it for 3 semesters, sorry. So if you went to, for instance, if you went to CNM, you could get it for 3 semesters. And then if you transfer to a 4-year school, you can then continue to get it for 4 more semesters. In order to qualify for the scholarship and to maintain for the scholarship, you must maintain a 2.5 cumulative GPA. So once again, when I say it starts the 2nd semester, it's after your 1st semester when you complete a 2.5 GPA and complete, if you're going to a 4-year school, 15 credit hours, and if you're going to a community college, 12 credit hours. So that's, once again, for every semester from there, you're required, if you're at a 4-year school, to complete 15 hours and maintain a 2.5 GPA. If you're at a community college or other 2-year college, 12 hours with a 2.5. The amount of the lottery scholarship varies. So New Mexico Higher Education Department every June determines how much it'll cover. So right now, for instance, it covers, I think, approximately about 60% of tuition at like a school like at UNM. Institutional scholarships. So this is another big category. As you'll see on here, I'll give some examples at UNM just to give you an idea of how it may be at a school. But as you can see on here, this varies greatly by school. So all the items I brought up earlier about the FAFSA, cost of attendance, expected family contribution, that's pretty standard stuff in the fact that the FAFSA application is the same no matter where you go. Yeah, the verification's done at each school, and there may be subtle differences there. Cost of attendance varies because cost varies at schools. But your expected family contribution, generally the same at every school. Institutional scholarships is the choice of that school. As a result, it varies greatly. Always, as I mentioned earlier about everything else, always check on the application process and deadlines. Never assume that it's done that way at UNM, must be done that way at NMSU, it must be that way at ENMU, whatever. Every school is different. So this can be down from the means in which you apply versus the qualifications, any number of things. So you can see here a couple examples I gave. At UNM, institutional scholarships for freshmen are generally awarded at the time of admission or based on the admission application. But we have 2 applications that also require additional information and essays, maybe a video. Some schools, it may be the opposite, where all their programs have essays, or maybe further, where they don't have any applications other than the admission application. So once again, let me underline, always check with your school, always check with what their application process and what their deadlines are. If you miss these dates, that may be it. Like that could be it for scholarships. So this does not include lottery, but institutional scholarships. Institutional scholarships really at the behest of each school. I listed a couple more things here just because there'll be a little maybe down the road for you, but also make sure that whatever school you attend, you check on what might be called general scholarships, money that's been donated to the school. Maybe these are smaller pots of money. Maybe they help with a few books or something along those lines. Check with your school. In our case, we award them in February, no application. We base it on your information at the school. It's for continuing students. Other schools, maybe they award it through an application. Maybe they do it at a different time of year. Maybe they do it for freshmen. Maybe they only do it for upperclassmen. Check with your school. Last example I'm giving here from an institutional perspective is academic departments. So, and this is once again, varies school to school, but at UNM, for instance, there's ones that are housed in the financial aid office, or like our freshman scholarships, those general ones I mentioned. And then there's also ones that are maybe the School of Engineering has had money donated to them that they can allocate. You really want to check not only with the school in that case, but the academic department. So if you're going to be an engineering student, go talk to the engineering department and see what they have. Your school may have a central repository of which you can get all the information, or maybe it's broken out by department. So check in with your school, check with your financial aid and scholarship office. They will know this information and they can put you in the right direction. This is another one, when I said everything varies, this can vary from department to department. And once again, maybe it's just based on GPA. Maybe it's based on GPA and essays. Maybe it's based on community service. Any number of things. Find out, and don't ever hesitate to ask questions about this. This is, like I said, these can be the difference here. Maybe once again, if it's a few books, that's still a few books you're not having to pay out of pocket. So check on that and make sure you talk to talk to the financial aid office at the school you're attending. Find out once again, if is it a decentralized model where you look at academic departments, find out all that information, make sure you ask your school what their processes are. Good chance they have it on their website. So every school is gonna have a financial aid website. But it never hurts to call them, stop in or whatever, and find out the specifics of the information. Kind of another thing on scholarships. So we already talked about the state scholarship, lottery scholarship. We talked about a variety of internal ones at the school to institutional scholarships. Let's talk a little bit about external scholarship opportunities. So, and this will also reemphasize something I had said earlier, and that is never pay for research. So like I said earlier about the FAFSA, how the first F in FAFSA was for free, on scholarship searches, there are a ton of free scholarship searches. Do not pay, other than the CSS profile we talked about earlier, do not pay an organization to help you look for scholarships. Maybe there's something that works for you, like an honor society or something like that later in your career. But for just a general search for scholarships to find out what's out there, do not pay anyone for it. A lot of the people who require payments for that are trying to scam you, and then also take in money and maybe distribute a little bit of it back, but they're taking in an application fee for you. I gave you 3 examples here. These are valid ones, but by no means exhaustive for the only ones that are out there. Just once again, make sure you're not paying for anything. And basically what these do is they're looking for you to set up a profile with them, and they try and match you up with opportunities. So you see at the bottom, I say, be specific in your search. Yes, you want to look for that, but also be specific when you fill out your profile so that they know as much about you so they can try and match you up with opportunities. These external ones are also usually, though they can vary by dollar amount, smaller in value. Once again, though, I wouldn't turn away $400 or $500 or something along these lines. And these are some of the scholarships you hear about. Sometimes, you'll see on a website, we're like, oh, money goes underutilized. These are some of them that might happen because these may be ones that require applications and essays and things along those lines that maybe people aren't just pursuing. So here at UNM and most schools, your institutional scholarships are paid out. They figure out who's eligible and disperse that money. But these are, once again, these funds may not be associated with the school. So as a result, if people aren't applying, then the money's not getting released. So take a look around at these websites, fill out a profile. Worst you'll probably usually get is applications maybe you're not interested in, or advertisements and things along those lines. But really check this out. I've seen persistence pay off for this for students, and this is not just a freshman thing. This is as you go on in school too, because there may be stuff that's available to you as a continuing student. Lastly on here, I said seek local organizations. Are you or your parents part of an organization? Whether any part of your life where there might be an opportunity, check with them. Maybe there's something that they're offering. I've seen it from employers to fraternal organizations or a church or any number of things where maybe they have a small opportunity and maybe it's something that you could qualify for. It's kind of general information on here about school financial aid resources. This kind of emphasizes what I've been talking about though, and that is that talk to your school. That's why the schools have financial aid and scholarship offices. Schools, every school I'm aware of course, in this day and age, has a website and a website dedicated to financial aid and scholarships. Even though right now we're in the pandemic, so you may not be able to do an in-person appointment. Schools in general, I'm sure, are doing virtual appointments, still talking by phone or chat or email. Make sure you're talking to your school and get specific information. Ask specific questions and get those answers. Schools, UNM being one of them, often have frequently asked question sites, which means that you can also get information at 2 o'clock in the morning if you so desire, because they'll have information about frequently asked questions and resources available to you. Lastly, stay on top of deadlines. So you see on here, and I've mentioned this multiple times, never assume on deadlines, and don't assume that if you missed a deadline, like, oh, well, it'll be okay. A lot of these are limited resources, and if you miss a date, you may be out, once again, thousands of dollars, even though you might be otherwise eligible. So once again, ask those questions of schools and find out what those deadlines are, and then adhere to them. And then also make sure that you're following any guidelines that that school has. So once again, if it's on essays or for an application or something like that, find out what's required and go from there. Okay. My general information on that, as you see, there's my email address. If you're not attending UNM, you're still welcome to email me. If you have a question about the legitimacy of something or something like that, or just kind of want to point in the right direction, happy to help. And like I said, feel free to drop me a line.